Our panel this morning, Shirin Adel, the first person on the stage, and then Kitty Crowther on the opposite side of the table, and Chen Jiang will be speaking a little bit about their own personal migrations and their translations as an illustrator, as a human being, and also how it might play out in their work. Today, what we're going to be doing is first asking each illustrator to introduce themselves for 5 minutes, and then following that brief introduction, in which they will talk about themselves and their work in 5 brief minutes, they will be talking about their personal journeys, and then following that, we will try to engage in some dialogue with each other and with the audience about their work. So first, we'd like to begin with Shirin, please.
I'm from Iran, and I was born in this country by accident because my parents were living here at the time, but they're both Iranians, and they moved back to Iran soon after. I grew up in Iran, and I came here in 1994. So this is a special year for me because it means I've lived here for 18 years now, which is just as long as I lived in Iran, and which is a bit strange because from now on I've lived in this country longer than I've lived in my own country. Coming here at the age of 18 was wonderful for me because as you probably know, there are a lot of limitations in Iran, especially for women, and almost anything a teenage girl likes to do are against the law. And so it was wonderful to come here and be able to dress how I wanted and do whatever I wanted. I love Iran. I mean, there are a lot of wonderful things, and all my family lived there and everything, but I think that was a perfect age to come here and experience all these wonderful new things. And what was very interesting about coming here was that while I was here, I even started to appreciate a lot of things about my own culture that I had not paid much attention to until then. So things like it was, I'd grown up on Persian carpets and seeing all these wonderful pottery, hand-painted, everything, all these colorful fabrics that people, all the traditional dresses people wore, and all these wonderful things. And I was looking at them in a completely different way. So I think that was, later on, that maybe influenced my own work. I studied illustration at Loughborough, which I loved it. I've always loved drawing, and in Iran it was difficult because it was after the revolution, and the government didn't really pay much attention to art. They were more interested in bomb making, things like that, science, and so that wasn't something they did at school. We didn't really have art at school. So it was great when I came here, and the art side was wonderful. Yeah, this is from the Shahnameh, which is by Elizabeth Laird. And this, I loved working on this book because Shahnameh is one of my, I don't know if you know about this, this is like a really huge book of poetry. It's 1,000 years old, and it's about, it has all these wonderful stories from Iran. It was written by Elizabeth Laird and translated into English, and I got to illustrate it, which was fantastic. This is another page, but you can't see the bottom.
I'm sorry.
And this is from another book that I've just done. It's called Dreams, and this is the book that I've written myself, actually. It comes out in May.
Mm-hmm. We'll look forward to it very much then. Thank you, and we'll hear from you again in just a few minutes. Our next illustrator is Kitty Crowther.
My name is Kitty Crowther, and my father is English, my mother is Swedish, they met on a Russian boat somewhere. And they decided to go to Belgium and had my sister and I. And so I have a hearing problem, I have hearing machines, and for me it's language has always been very difficult. And I started to talk about 4. And so when I would step in the house, it would be England, because father had a strong personality. And and then I would go to school and it would be French. And I got very fascinated by people. I just would try to understand what's going in their head. And I was very surprised that when you actually don't hear very well, you read some other things and you understand some other things. And I was very surprised how people could be so kind and say such hard words, or have a very strong faith and very dark, and be so wonderful and so nice. I got very interested in body language, and the thing that's got me so interested in the whole world, we all have eyes, nose, mouths, almost in the same place, and but we are so unique, and we are just like a living story, like a living book, and that's why for me stories are so unique. And I realized that if I have to choose between drawing or writing, I think the one thing that's fascinated me totally is inventing stories. I would be a storyteller. So luckily mother and father thought that it would be very, very important to have books at home. So we had English books and we had Swedish books, and they read them so beautifully. And luckily, because finally where I come from is more the stories they told me, because even I don't really feel English, I don't really feel Swedish, I don't feel Belgian, so who am I? So I realized that one way to feel comfortable about this is to write stories and to draw them. And I remember as a child, my father would read Beatrix Potter, and they were very old edition, and they had white pages between the stories. You had one text and one drawing, then you had a double white page. And that is just how I felt, just a white page. And it was so fantastic, this slow turning, because I just love this edge bit, and just this border bit, or just this borderline bit. And I get very confused, so where are you from, and what do you do, and what is your work, and where do you come from? And as we always have to put people in drawers, and it's always make me a bit uncomfortable, because I don't know what to answer. So stories have this huge healing power. It's sometimes you find the same story on the opposite world, and it's all about how do we live, and how is relationship, and how do I grow up, and how do I feel happy, and how do I understand it. And I got very, very interested in small children and children. I just love their huge freedom. I mean, no way you can beat them, because they are the new generation, and they have nothing alike, like you, like me, or anyone. And there's no point of projecting our fear that, and I'm also surprised they say, okay, this is a good book, this is a bad book, you should be reading this, you should be doing this. And I just love taking books and read to children, and I'm also surprised what they like, and travel with them. It's like a traveling, so I just love opening doors, opening windows, and go as far as I can. This is a book called Me and Nothing. I got always very interested in loneliness and this huge capacity of how to heal. And so she had this imaginary friend, but is he really imaginary or not? So, yeah. This is a story about being afraid of dark. I mean, as a child, I was always very, very afraid. And most of the time, my parents were great. But quarter of the time, they were really very annoyed. And so could I go back to the fog, please? I just love this connection of very, very small and very, very big, and tenderness. This is called Poca in Mino Musée. I like inventing characters, and especially characters that doesn't really have a name. People ask me, well, what kind of insect this is, and I say, I have no clue. There's about 5 million insects who has a name, even more that doesn't have a name. So I thought it would be nice to have a kind of a series with a little daughter and a father, and so this little girl goes to the toilet by herself in a museum, in a very, very big museum. And the father says, do you want me to come with you? No, go by myself. So there she goes, and she gets lost, of course. And so she, you know, I don't know if you remember, I remember. You know, sometimes you're lost and you think, okay, maybe I try this door, and then you open it and you go, oops, maybe not. So I really like this everyday life and how you achieve. Just love those kids have their way of thinking, and it's really fantastic. This is Annie Dulac. I realized because I've been to so many classes and so many schools and talking to and doing lots of workshops with children and with adults, we all have stories that's been stuck somewhere in our head. And I realized that children are very interested about adults because they know that they're going to be an adult one day. And it's very difficult in this world because we have a lot of pictures in the streets. What is a woman? What is a man? What is a job? Is it being incredibly beautiful, having an incredible house? And no, it's not really like that that's work. And it's taken time to understand that, no, you're not going to be a film star. No, you're not going to be, I mean, you could, but it's very rare. And so I got very interested in those borderline person and how come that they become like this? And why did we ask them to become what we want them to be instead of being what they want to be? And so I got interested in those characters that are not really beautiful, but not really ugly either. And they become beautiful because they have this inner, something inside themselves that's stronger than beauty.
Thank you, Kitty, and we'll return to some of those themes again in just a minute. Chen, Jiang Hong. Yes.
Hello, I'm Chen. Well, my life is not really extraordinary, but I was born in China and went to Paris at 87, 25 years ago, and to study in art school, and I stayed. And then I'm a child of Mao period, which was Cultural Revolution, and I never had a lot of books. And then I started making children books. It's really by accident. It was in 1984. I met a French publisher to ask me to do something, to illustrate the book, and then he asked me to write books myself, and blah blah blah, and then I started doing books. So, which I never had a book when I was a child. So, when I become adult, I said, now I'm making books. This book is about a painter from Tang Dynasty. Little Ego is about a little boy to learn how to do Kung Fu. And it's a tiger prince. It's a little boy who's sent off by the parents to the forest to meet the tiger and to grow up with the tiger and become a prince. And this is a book I made about Chinese opera.
Thank you very much. And so now you've had a very brief introduction into each illustrator and their work. During this next time, we'd like to focus on ways in which their personal journeys, which some of them have alluded to already, have impacted their particular work. I took a few notes as they were speaking, and having read some of their other materials ahead of time, I want to go back to asking a question about a few of them, connecting back to when Sean Tan talked about learning to look to make sense out of his world. And particularly in Sean Tan's work, he was looking at his portrayals through surrealism and how it's not a realistic portrayal, but still in that imaginative world, we're looking to make sense out of it. As I listened to Shirin, she talked about how she learned more about her own culture when she was in the United Kingdom than she did at home. In my own personal story as an immigrant, I had lived in the United States for quite some years when I moved to a state called Iowa in central United States. And someone said to me, "You've become more Japanese now that you've moved to Iowa." And I really thought about that statement. And as Shirin said, I learned about my own culture being away from it. I'd like to pursue that a little bit and see how that impacts your work as well.
It wasn't so much learning that I think I appreciated it more, because it's hard to appreciate things sometimes when we're always surrounded by them. So every time I went back, I would look at all these Iranian art in a completely new way, and I just love them now because I've been always surrounded by them. I've been playing on those carpets, eating from those dishes, seeing things around me, but it wasn't interesting because they'd always been there. And now I was here and I was looking down and those things weren't around. So when I went back, I would really see them in a completely new way. And what I really loved about all these things, I mean, the patterns are wonderful, the colors and everything. I loved all those things, but the most important thing for me was that every time I saw one of those, maybe the Persian carpets, the main thing I was thinking about was how much love and care the person or people who have made these pieces have put into this. I was thinking about the person doing that work, and I know sometimes maybe they had to do it because it was their work, but I think for something that beautiful, you have to have loved it for a very long time while you were making it. And I think that was the main thing I've taken away from Persian art. When I create something, I put a lot of love into it, and I always make sure that I really, really enjoy the piece that I'm making.
So this,
and I like to, sorry, I really like to, when people look at my work, to think, wow, someone's had a wonderful time making this. That's my main goal. So if I'm making something and halfway through I think I'm bored with this, or maybe I want to finish it quickly, I scrap it. I start again because it has to be great. It has to be fun for me. And maybe that's one of the, I use a lot of different materials in my work, and I think that's another thing. I like to surprise myself. I do a sketch, but I don't know what kind of materials I will use. I might use twigs, plasticine, fabrics, but that's what keeps me excited and makes the work fun. Yeah. So that's, for me, that's my goal to.
And I think that comes out as we appreciate and enjoy Shirin's art. When we see it, we feel that sense of joyousness and the deep care and loving she has put into creating. Your correction that it was not so much learning about your culture, but the developing a deeper appreciation for it is certainly profound, especially for those of us, and I imagine many of you in the room here, who have migrated from one place to another. And you get a deeper understanding and appreciation for what you have left behind and see it through that new lens. I'd like to follow up with the same question and thought with Chen. In one of your biographical sketches I found online, it talked about how your artwork seemed profoundly, deeply rooted in your Chinese homeland, and yet at the same time you talk about how you're deeply committed to creating a sense of solidarity with the world cultures. So while your artwork seems to speak to us on the surface as being deeply rooted in China, I'd like to hear you speak a little bit about how you connect with the solidarity of world cultures through your art.
Well, I think it's very obvious because I travel a lot. It's like when you ask somebody to start traveling, and then it's all about learning, understanding, giving, sharing. And it's very emotional human experience. And I always say that I attach to Chinese culture. It doesn't mean I love China. I love French culture. It's not that mean I'm French, I love France. It's nothing to do with national identity. Culture, I think, is two things very important. It's the personal identity and the cultural identity. And then I think this word
I like he ends with a question for us to think about too, and the whole idea of whether some stories in fact can be translated and others not as readily. I'd like to pick up on one thing that you said there as I lead into Kitty's question, which is that, Chen, you just said that it's not really about national identity. You love China, but it's not because you are only Chinese as being your love of it, or friends because of that?
Of course not, because I love Chinese culture. It's not, I mean, I love China. It's nothing to do with the national proud national identity, and what I always defend is as a Chinese who's traveling around the world, telling story to the children from in Algeria, in Africa, in America, in Europe, in Russia, and I never had a problem. The only place I have some problem is China. It's very funny thing to tell. It's really interesting, and also it's only one language I cannot translate because all my books was being written in French. So when it has to translate to Chinese, of course I did myself, and then the problem is that it doesn't really work. It's very funny.
Yes.
And at the same time I feel very sad about it, because at that moment, and in one way, I'm very happy because, my books have been traveling around over the world. And then I said, why is that? Because when I did all the Chinese texts, my Chinese publisher says, it's not working. It's not really not good. Right.
And as people, those of us who leave our homeland as children and then write in another language, it is sometimes, and very often for me especially, difficult to step back into that original language. So while those of us who see Chen's work visually see the very visual Chinese storytelling that you have done, the fact that he's written in French, I think, originally.
I want to give a very precise image of this really ancient culture, which, of course, there's a historical, political culture, many reasons, with the Chinese culture being always stand like kind of exotic Far East thing. And when, just kind of all these paintings we like, but we don't know what it's about, but nice, but yes, far away, but we have nothing to do with really, but it still stay kind of exotic thing. But what I try to do is to give really a precise image through the story, especially to the kids, with a very easy and understandable language, and to share with them of the essence of this culture, and then to find out kind of universal connection, but it's very pretentious, but I think that's the end, what we're always searching and looking for as a human being. And I think everybody here, we are here for this.
And I think it goes back to what Shantan was also talking about, this kind of universal curiosity, the searching, the looking into the stories that we see both through the visual as well as through the text of it all. And in this time of just being post-Olympic, it feels very interesting to consider the concept of whether things are about national pride, national identity, or whether we are among the world as individuals, identifying ourselves with a country of origin, but being willing to engage with the world, not necessarily as a representative of national identity, but rather of our own seeking for experiences throughout. So thank you. This leads very nicely into my question for Kitty, which is this question about how one's artwork and creation is or is not related to our personal stories of migrations and translations. And I think that Chen was very effective in his earlier talk in helping us see that, yes, even art, which is surrealism and alternative realities, are about looking to make sense of our worlds, both that we know and we don't know, and to represent that world both very specifically and realistically, as well as through an imaginative expression. So, Kitty, would you tell us a little bit about how your work has had a voice that shows your sense of what you said, I'm not really British or Swedish or Belgian, and so I'm looking to see who am I? You talked about being lost, but curious in finding story.
I'll try to answer to that. Well, I was listening to what you were saying, and I was trying to be as résumé, to make it as clear as possible. The one thing I really like what you were saying, that when you draw, when you write, you have to love it, and the time that you pass on it. I mean, time is a risky business because with computers and blah 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 blah. But so I could just with a pen and spend really a lot of time filling, and while I'm filling, I'm still telling stories, and so that's very important. And when I started to invent stories, I started to write them in English, because that was my mother tongue. I mean, that's the language that my father and my mother loved me. But my writing English is really terrible. I make a lot of mistakes, even in French, because being this non-real good hearing person, for me, it's quite difficult. But when I tried to write in French, when I started, when I was 24, it was extremely complicated, and I put words and words and words, and I just put a lot of garbage around it, or I don't know what, but when you talk in a language that you don't manipulate that well, but you feel for it, then suddenly you have a kind of the scarlet, just the main point, and that's it. I mean, I believe that you have to get rid of all this artifice and make it really, really as straight as you can. The other thing is that because I couldn't understand a lot of things, and when you were small, and we would read a story to you, there would at least a few words that you didn't understand. But I found them very fascinating, because suddenly I could put what I wanted in those words, and it's also about creation. So I don't try and make the stories as clear as possible. The feeling, yes, I try and be exactly where I want to, but I just love that. There's, when I was talking about those empty pages, like this book of Harry Potter, between the words, I try and have a gap, and I try that the child, with his own imagination, with his own life, he will just fill it, and I just love to give that huge freedom, like a lot of white page. I love white pages with drawing them, because then they can put their own country behind, or their own trees, or their own birds, and I find that very, very, very powerful, and it's really it's a kind of alright, that's the way I feel, and that's the way I think, but it's a kind of like an invitation, like saying, okay, this is what's happening, so why don't you come into? And the other thing that I try in my work is to have this huge impression. When you read a story, and you like it so much that you don't realize that time is going by. Just like have this impression that you're going somewhere. And Beatrice Potter, Astrid Lindgren, Quentin Blade, all those, Maurice Sendak, all those wonderful people, Chen, who I know. I mean, he didn't talk a lot about the beginning of stories, but they're really, really beautiful. And the tiger story just really, and it's really like, you know, it takes you somewhere.
Right.
And that's the only thing I'm interested in, actually. The rest I don't really care. Right. I mean, I'm not really interested in really beautifully done. I'm just interested in what are you going to say? What is your emotion? What are you going to share without pretending, without, you know, saying, okay, I'm going to explain you what's the world about. I mean, who cares? I mean, they're going to find out by themselves anyway, so.
Well, with you telling us who cares about what are we going to explain about these things, and with your invitation to look at the work and to have that sense of awe, I think, and delight that you just described for us, I think that I would like to close this session today, which has been a very short time together, to invite you to explore their work more, to look at the books in the bookstore, and to engage with them in conversation at the tea break that's coming up. So thank you very much for your time today.